Last by William Soutar. Touch not with irreverent hands, nor look upon with eyes of stone. In the grass Queen Sheba stands, beside the grave of Solomon. Dust of Adam lifts and falls forever. Helen is a flower, and the Babylonian walls in an hourglass tell the hour. Every moment is a balm, every moment is a wound, every silence is a psalm, every field is holy ground. Touch not with a reverent hand, nor look upon with eyes of stone. In a falling grain of sand is the strength of Babylon. William Soutar was born in 1891 in Perth, Scotland, to John and Margaret. His family were originally farmers, but his father became a successful master joiner. During his lifetime, William Soutar was known as a prominent poet and diarist, becoming a leading figure in the Scottish literary Renaissance. Growing up in Perth, he was noted as a rebellious and determined boy, once staging a solidarity strike with his school friends in support of the local miners' strike. He enjoyed his time at school, despite the shadow of the First World War looming over him. He recollects his situation on turning 18. I was one of the fleetest at the academy, one of the strongest, first in my year at most things. I was writing poetry. I was in love. I was popular, both in the classroom and on the playing field. I never reached this condition of living fullness again. When Soutar came of age, he enlisted with the Royal Navy in 1916. Although he did not see much action in the war, he did witness the surrender of the German fleet. In 1918, while still serving in the Navy, Soutar contracted food poisoning. Later that same year, he fell ill again. This time it was diagnosed as rheumatism. Unbeknownst to him, the bacteria that had entered his system as a result of the food poisoning was spreading to his spine and causing serious, lifelong damage. After the war, he studied medicine at the University of Edinburgh, though quickly found it to be too gruesome and changed to English instead. Soutar's time at university was marred by his ailing health, and he just managed to scrape by with third-class honours. Later on, he would regret not utilising his university days to broaden his understanding of the social and cultural concerns of his era. After his graduation and more severe bouts of ill health, where Soutar noted the stiffening of his bones, he was finally put in contact with a specialist, who correctly diagnosed him with ankylosing spondylitis, a type of inflammatory arthritis causing the joints to fuse together. This, he was informed, was a result of the bacteria he had contracted through the food poisoning, and unfortunately he had left it too late for a cure to be administered. He would now have to live with his worsening condition. Thus we rot into eternity, as Soutar himself put it. Being barred from any strenuous activity and facing a future of invalidism, he chose to devote himself utterly to the art of poetry, something that helped him going through the most difficult periods of his life. Forced to accept the care of his parents, he moved back into the family home, where he began to carve his name out as one of the greatest poets of the Scottish literary Renaissance. The Scottish literary Renaissance was a literary movement in the early and middle 20th century. It's associated with modernism, the Celtic revival, and nationalism. The late 19th century had seen renewed interest in Celtic folklore, landscapes and culture. However, many of the literary works on this subject heavily romanticised and idealised the Celtic life. Critics later dubbed this body of work as the Curtailed school. The word Curtailed is from the Scots language and translates to cabbage patch or cottage garden, highlighting the saccharine and insincere quality of the work that critics felt was not a valid representation of Scottish life. J.M. Barrie was perhaps the most famous writer to be associated with the Curtailed school. The Scottish literary Renaissance took a much more modernist approach to literature. The writers of this movement were concerned with realism, technology as well as folklore. They also cared deeply about the disappearing languages of Scotland, and many made efforts to write in the Scots language and dialect. Soutar's friend, the poet Hugh MacDiarmid, was the leading figure of this literary movement. He wrote in a language known as Lallans, which he describes as a kind of synthetic Scots, combining multiple forms of the Scots language. William Soutar was one of many to utilise this language in his poetry, although he didn't write exclusively in it. In 1927, his parents adopted his orphaned cousin, a 7-year-old girl named Evelyn, who Soutar became very close to. It was this relationship that prompted him, in 1933, to write a series of bairn rhymes, or children's poetry, which was very well received, although his friend and fellow poet MacDiarmid believed that such a practice was too much like the sweetness of the Curtailed school of literature. Eventually, Soutar would become bedridden in 1930 after a bout of pneumonia. Though he still maintained an active social life and had hundreds of visits from friends and contemporaries through the years. In light of this curtailing of his life, his literary output hugely increased. In 1942, Soutar fell ill again with pneumonia. This time it passed to his lungs, and on the 15th of October, 1943, he died in the early hours, being discovered by his father. His diary, titled The Diary of a Dying Man, was published after his death and is an extraordinary testament to his courage and resilience, as well as his intellectual and artistic ability. An extract from his diary serves to showcase how well he handled the restraints of his illness for the last 13 years of his life. I highly recommend both his diary and poetry for their insights on a perspective which most of us don't share, and when we do, we lack the mental fortitude to put it so eloquently into words. January, Friday 27th, 1933. I wonder if fit mortals realise that infirmity makes the most ordinary actions wonderful. A person, like myself, set aside from the thoroughfare of life, can often look on life's manifestation with a detachment denied the protagonist in the marketplace. Common acts become isolated from particular times and places and grow, by recollection, into moments of beauty, loved in themselves, without desire or regret. Thus everyday phrases can bring to such a watcher a rounded image of loveliness, mysteriously coloured by the consciousness that he himself can no longer enact them. Phrases such as, "He lifted a stone," "He stood by the sea," "He walked into the wood."